Hello, and welcome to today's event. A special thank you to our webinar sponsor, ServiceNow. To learn more about ServiceNow, view their on-demand webinar, How a Bold Strategy Enabled Paramount's Transferring Employee Experience by using the QR code on the screen or the link that is provided in the chat. With that, I would like to introduce your first speaker for today, Josh Bersin. Josh, you have the floor.
Thank you. Okay, here's the ServiceNow QR code for those of you that want it. There you go. Okay, so Kathi Enderes and I, Kathy's our SVP of Research, are going to talk about rewards, which is a very, very difficult topic at the moment with the inflation and the job market. So what we're going to do, and by the way, this is in advance of a massive research study we'll be publishing early next year to show you exactly how to do this well. So we've learned a lot about it over the last 6 or 9 months. But first I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the business environment. We'll address some of the questions. Kathi will give you some of the best practices, and we'll take whatever questions you guys would like. So where are we? You know, I like to think historically a little bit, and where we are at the moment, in the middle of the crypto meltdown, the stock market correction, the war in Ukraine, and inflation, is the end of an economic cycle. So it may not feel like that anymore, but we've actually had it pretty good for about 14 years, and 13 years, and since the end of 2008, 2009, and we're now shaking off the irrational exuberance that took place. And one of the things that took place is some companies overhired, some companies overestimated their growth, and pay went up a lot, maybe not as significantly as it should have for some people, not in an equal fashion, and a lot of inequalities and inequities were created. And so we're now in a world of adjusting to all that to deal with a very constrained and difficult labor market. And as most of you know, the workforce in general, and I just got back from Europe, I was in 3 countries, and I heard this everywhere I went, people are burned out. They're not just burned out because of their companies and their jobs and their managers, they're burned out because of the pandemic and all of the restrictions we've had in our lives, and they want flexibility above all. They want fair pay, and they kind of want their life back. I mean, that sounds kind of silly, but it's actually true. Most of us feel like we've lost a significant amount of personal mobility and freedom during the pandemic. And if you're in China, you still have been losing it. And we want to go back to some more, agency in our lives. And we want our employers to understand that. And at the middle of that, liberating period of time, we get this inflation. And so you go to the store, and, with $7, my wife went to the store a couple of days ago, with $7 for a little jar of mustard. And I went to the eye doctor, and he said, well, that's because there's mustard in Ukraine. So the mustard supply is constrained. I don't know why that is, but $7 is ridiculous from my standpoint. So you get frustrated about it, and then you go to your boss, and you say, well, why aren't you paying us more money in the middle of all this? And, of course, we don't have control over all of that. So we're in the middle of all of this right now, and employees are voting with their feet. Now, I was just looking at the data from October. The data from October just came out, and we're still losing voluntarily 2.7 to 2.8% of the workforce. It didn't go down that much. It went down a little. I have the numbers right in front of me, but roughly 2.7 times 12 is still close to a third of the workforce is voluntarily leaving their jobs. And I was in Europe. One of the things that came up in one of the big meetings I was with in the Netherlands is the population in most countries is flattening in size. The number of kids getting out of college is flat. The number of workers is declining. People are working longer years, but the fertility rate is very low. And a significant number of people simply are choosing not to work, especially in countries where there's great social benefits. And this is one of the problems they have in the Netherlands, and to some degree in Sweden, is people have, voluntarily decided, I'm either going to work part-time I'm going to do something different, or maybe I'm going to just take some time off. And that gets in the way with your company's growth plans, your company's economic, sort of needs, and your stock market valuation, and so forth. So it's a tricky time, and pay has a lot to do with this. We also know that when you interview CEOs, they're interested in productivity, they're interested in skills, they're interested in creativity. And I'm going to be putting together a big article on productivity over the next couple of days when I get a little bit of time. But productivity is the new management mantra, primarily because of the slowdown of the economy. And productivity is not as simple as you think. One way to get productivity is to do what Elon Musk did. Lay off half the people. All of a sudden, the productivity shoots up. I guarantee you that will work. For a little while. It won't work for a long time, because productivity is really made up of three things. It's made up of growth, growing the company, profits, continuously getting more out of the same expenses or people that you have, and innovation. You can't just only focus on productivity and say, oh, if we tighten the screws and make people work a little harder and not give them a raise, we're going to make more money. That doesn't work out in the long run, and that's really what my entire book is about, is the fact that you can't run your company that way. So I just put in a little article on LinkedIn about the fact that I don't think you should be copying Elon Musk for your talent strategy over the long run. It might work for the short run, but not for the long run. And then, of course, there's another underlying issue. And in the meetings I was just in the Netherlands, we talked about this a lot. The reason people want to leave their job, the reason they may want to quietly quit, the reason they may not be as engaged or productive as you'd like, is oftentimes a good reason. They might have kids at home. They might have an elderly parent at home. They may have healthcare issues of their own. They may be tired. They're not getting enough sleep. Whatever it may be, there's been a lot of mental and emotional issues that have entered their workforce. And, we as HR and business people have to deal with this. It varies by country, but in our research on healthcare, for example, what we found is that the reason 40 to 50% of nurses are leaving their jobs, careers, or profession isn't only because it's a hard job and maybe they're a little bit burned out, but maybe they have kids at home or they have a family they'd like to spend time with and they can't get child care or they can't afford it. This issue of pay really touches all of these topics. And I'm not trying to tell you the world is coming to an end, by the way. A lot of good things are happening. There's a lot of positives in all this, but these are the pressures that you face when you look at pay. The final pressure you have to think about is a little bit of a bigger one that I want you to just think about it in terms of, what you have when you have a conversation with the CFO and the CEO about pay. If you look at the World Bank data, and I just happened to spend a lot of time looking at this when I was going to Europe, of population size, working population size. There's a working population in most countries that's sort of between the age of 18 and 65 or so. I suppose it should be 75, but anyway, it's around 65. And those numbers are about to peak. In some countries like Japan and China, they've peaked already. In the U.S., they're not going to peak for a while yet. In the northern European countries, they've peaked or they're about to peak in the next 5 to 10 years. In Germany, they've peaked. In the UK, they've peaked. There will not be more workers without immigration, and immigration is a political problem. So, you don't want to lose the workforce you have. If you lose a whole bunch of people, unless it's an exceptional condition, it's going to get hard to get them back again. It's going to be expensive. And one of the pieces of data that we validated during the trip to Europe and also through some other research is it can cost you 4 to 5 to 6 times the cost of an employee's salary to replace a person versus to promote somebody internally. So, if you think about pay as an engagement and retention tool, it's not a very big cost to give somebody a raise, roughly maybe a 4 or 5% raise, which is roughly what people are getting right now to keep up with inflation, and prevent people leaving because it's going to get harder to hire them in the future. So these are some of the demographic, sort of realities. Now, why is this happening? So one of the things that Kathi and I have done in our team here is we did a lot of digging into this issue about over the last 2 years, because virtually every HR or business person we talk to is telling us the same story. We're having a hard time hiring. We need better skills. We're looking for people of a new profession or a new skill set that we haven't done before. There's a reason for this, and the reason I want to go through this is this will give you some ideas on the solutions. So, in many ways, the future of work, as as you may think about it in your own company, started to become redefined around 1998, when the Netscape browser was invented. And I know most of you don't want to talk about the past, but I think it's worth just spending a minute on it. When the internet first was created, I don't know, it sort of spawned out of nowhere. We didn't know what it was going to do. And, in the early days of it, we didn't even think it was going to be used for business. And of course, what happened was very innovative companies said, well, maybe we can sell stuff online, maybe we can do service online, maybe we can do sales online. And so there was this initial wave of adopting digital technologies in the business community. And those were the days when we built our first websites, we hired software engineers, we weren't even building mobile apps yet. And as we did that, we started to discover that once we digitized all of these customer experiences, we needed to be organized differently, we needed to be trained differently, we needed to be set up differently behind the scenes to deliver and respond to customers that are interacting us with a digital experience. Omni-channel retailing, by the way, I think we're about to have the biggest Christmas season that we've ever had in omni-channel shopping. And I think the reason is it took 25 years to figure out how to really do omni-channel well. I'm always amazed now when I go to a website how quickly and easy it is to find something, to buy it. And if you leave it in your shopping cart, of course, you get all sorts of requests to buy it later. These things have become very sophisticated, but behind the scenes, there's been a transformation, a digital transformation. And our global workforce intelligence research, which is very, very interesting, you can join our membership and get access to it, is basically showing you what these trailblazer companies do, what these companies that are really good at this do. So anyway, you are going through all this digital transformation. Then we had the pandemic, and the pandemic accelerated this, added more digital transformation to the workforce, the remote hybrid work experience, the remote delivery of products and services, supply chain, all the many multi-channel ways we can get access to things without having to touch somebody or talk to somebody face-to-face if we don't want to. And what that did is it created a workforce in most companies where we were actually moving into a new industry. So I just read an article this morning about the electric car, and the EV industry, which is obviously growing like crazy. Only 1% of Americans have electric cars. In my neighborhood, it seems like 50%, but turns out there aren't enough charging stations. And we don't even know what the business model is for charging stations. Should the charging stations be sold by the car companies? Should they be sold by local retailers? Should the power company run it? Should Chevron have charging stations? There's going to be a big war to figure out who does this. And those are going to be cross-industry solutions. Healthcare getting into informatics, retail getting into healthcare, telecommunications companies getting into media, media companies getting into data services and marketing and advertising, on and on and on. And so what we used to think of these siloed industries where we would hire somebody in our industry who's worked in our industry before, it doesn't work that way anymore. 45% of the people who changed jobs during this last 3-year period changed industries. So we have to basically realize that the jobs, the pay, the job models in our company maybe aren't what they thought they were, including pay, by the way. And one of the other reasons pay is becoming a bigger issue is that as automation continues to replace more and more routine work, and at the meeting I was at in the Netherlands, there was a broad consensus that well over 90% of the routine work has been automated. I think most people don't like saying that, but it's true. that most of the people that we employ are doing human value add work. They aren't fitting into a job and doing the job as you defined it. They are adding value to the job with their own personal skills. And so if you hire somebody who's maybe not well educated or not well suited to the job and you pay them less, you're probably going to get a lower return than on somebody who is highly suited to the job, highly creative, highly trained, who you pay more. In other words, the higher paid employee may turn out to be a greater return on investment than the low paid employee. So we have to think about pay in a different manner, still dealing with the issues of equity. The final thing I'll just mention before I turn it over to Kathi is that the tolerance for imperfection on this is getting less. I've worked for, a lot of companies and oftentimes felt underpaid or unfairly paid, and I'm sure most of you know this happens all the time. And in most economic conditions, you just deal with it. Maybe you gripe a little bit to your boss or you ask for more money, but you don't go out and look for a new job all the time. Well, that's not true anymore. Now we have three of the world's, by the way, I can add the railroads to this, the three of the world's most highly esteemed companies realizing that if they don't deal with these issues of the employee experience, pay being part of them, they're going to have a union problem, and the unions are going to get in the middle, and the unions are going to advocate on behalf of the employees, and now our life's going to get even more complicated. So the issue of managing pay strategically is more than a cost-benefit financial, CFO type of a topic. Let me give you one more example of a company that I think exemplifies this journey. So most of you know Microsoft is an old company. I hate to tell you this, it's been around a long time. When I worked at IBM in 1980, Microsoft was a software company then. That was 40-something years ago, 42. They're still around. They've come a long way. They've been through a lot. The early days of Microsoft, probably the first 2 decades of Microsoft, it was a brutally competitive, dog-eat-dog, up-or-out type of a company, very scrappy, very aggressive, worked very well for them in the heyday of the PC market and the Windows market and the early days of the internet connectivity and database market and other things they got into. There were wide variations of pay. There was a forced distribution. I know somebody who worked at Microsoft who told me that they were forced to lay off 10% of their employees every year. It was just the rule. You had to find 10% of the people to let go. Well, of course, there were some problems with that. They missed the mobile computing market. If you read the history of Microsoft with Nokia, it'll send chills through your spine what happened. They missed the Google and the search engine market. They missed the advertising market. Now they've caught up into many of these things have caught up. And they rethought their whole talent model. Microsoft now is a very collaborative, developmental, innovative, focused company. They move people around very well. They're very focused on pay equity. They're an employer of choice. They have a great leader, really, one of the most successful CEOs of our time, $1 trillion market capitalization, because they really rethought their culture and their employee practices. It wasn't a problem of just thinking up the new technology, which, by the way, I'm not sure Mark Zuckerberg understands that. But so you can do this too. So that's really what we want to talk about today, is what we've been learning on this. The final thing I'll just talk about and then turn it over to Kathi is this issue of resilience. When I talked in the beginning about productivity, it isn't an issue of getting more work out of an individual person. It's really getting more work out of a large community of people in an organization. It may turn out, and when you do this well, it means you have to have healthy work practices so people feel resilient and they get sleep and they can bring their best ideas and their best energies to work. It means that the company is willing to move people around and adapt. And it means that the organization as a whole can readapt as business needs change. And that means giving people slack and freedom and opportunity and skills and fair pay to do that. Pay can get in the way of this. when people are unfairly paid, when they sense there's an unfair pay process, when they don't understand why they're paid the way they are, when they are overpaid relative to their peers and people find out about it, all this stuff doesn't work because people become very political. And most companies are flattening their organizations to try to build more agility, but pay will get in the way of that. I guarantee you. I've talked to tech companies that have mid-level engineers making $600,000 or $700,000 a year. I know that's a frightening thing to find out. And how did they get there? I don't know how they got there. During the heyday, they just did it. That gets in the way of agile transformation in the future. So we need to look at pay in a very strategic way in the year ahead. And it is not a clear picture. The reason that we're doing this research and the reason we want to do this webinar is most of the conversations we have with the very senior executives, they're not sure what to do either. It's not clear. Obviously, Elon Musk is shooting from the hip over there at Twitter, and that's a very special case. But there is no playbook for this. We haven't been through a global pandemic following a 14-year economic cycle in the middle of a slowdown, not in my life. So I don't think you're going to find any CEOs or CFOs that quite understand how to do this. They're learning as they go, and compensation is one of the most valuable tools that we have. So Kathi, let me turn it over to you, the expert with the answers.
Thank you, Josh. And this was fantastic. And so what I wanted to talk with you a little bit about is what are we going to do about this and how are we going to respond? So let me just walk you through a little bit more context on what we saw in the market. So one thing I wanted to share with you is a study from McKinsey that said, why are people leaving their jobs? And we always said maybe the reason why people leave their job, and you saw the quit rates that Josh talked about before, they're leaving their job because of their manager. Well, that's not true anymore. So people leave because they don't have development opportunities and they don't get enough money. So the inadequate total compensation factors in there. Of course, uninspiring leaders, but then also is the work meaningful? Do they have flexibility and are they supported at work? So all of these things, if you think about them holistically, factor into what we call total rewards. Here's another study that we looked at, a study from Mercer that said pay issues are now the number one employee concerns. It has exceeded, last year was about fitness and health and work-life balance. Well, now it's all about covering expenses because of the inflation, and also people are worried, are they going to ever be able to retire? So all of that has to do with pay rates, with compensation rates, and then work-life balance as well. And then you get to physical health and well-being. And businesses are responding. So this is another study from Willis Towers Watson that said now the U.S. pay increases have hit 4.6% for 2023. That's the highest it's been since the 70s. So businesses are responding to these concerns, but is it going to be enough? And how are you going to make ends meet? Employees are responding to that too, of course. They're reducing their spending. You see some of these results here too. They're reducing spending. They're reducing saving as well, which in turn is kind of a downward cycle. Are they going to be able to retire? And is it going to get worse for them? So all of these issues are very, very complex. And so when we did this big study of total rewards, and we studied about 95 practices, total rewards organizational practices, and we surveyed almost 500 organizations globally. We asked them, how do you describe total rewards in one word? And this is what they came out with. And so you see a big word on non-existent. So actually they don't have any total rewards. They don't even think about total rewards in a kind of holistic way. The other thing that we saw in this study is these pay practices, compensation practices are still stuck in the 20th century. So they're still, it's the most, I think we had a hypothesis when we started out, a pay practice is actually the most backward practices of all the HR management practices, and the answer is yes. So you see all of these like percentages here where like hardly anybody is giving people flexibility on how they're going to get paid, or they allow for personalization, or they use data or insights from social media to understand what their employees need, or they even make total rewards data part of their people analytics and talent intelligence strategy. So, or integrate any kind of total reward systems. I think most companies don't even have any like systems to speak of, or like something that's really sophisticated. So lots and lots of upward potential there too. Most companies also don't really prioritize and personalize total rewards. So you see some of these statistics here. What's working well? Yes, they're providing, companies are providing healthcare options. They are supporting maybe people to prepare for retirement, and that's great because we saw this is one of the big things on top of people's minds. But do they allow people to tailor any of their compensation mix or their compensation practices, their recognition programs, or do they even think about total rewards in this comprehensive way beyond just paying people and providing basic benefits? So what we set out to study was this really full framework of completing kind of an approach of what we think about total rewards is actually not a cost, it's an investment in your people. So because when you invest in people and when you give people higher or more fair or better compensation and benefits, not more choices potentially, but the right choices, and distributed flexibly and equitably, your people will take your business forward. So it's really key to your business success. And of course, when you think about total rewards as a cost factor, you try to minimize that. But as Josh pointed out too, it's going to be actually much more cost effective to invest in your current employees than to lose them, and then you've got to hire somebody back at a higher rate, and you're going to take a long time to skill them up and train them up, and they need to build all the relationships. So focusing on optimizing your investment in total rewards, that's what all of this is about. So what we found out, and this is kind of a very complex chart, I'm not going to go through all of that, but basically what we did here is we colored in those areas that are most impactful to outcomes. And when we say outcomes, this was a really detailed statistical analysis when we said, what are these organizations accomplishing in their financial results? How well are their customers supported, and what's their customer satisfaction? How well are they innovating and creating change in the marketplace and leading the industry? And then also, of course, how well are they retaining and engaging their people, and how well are they attracting the right talent, and how well are they building the right skills for the future? And what you see here is compensation, benefits, the things to the right, they're really kind of table stakes. What really gets much more impact is, do you provide flexibility and career and purpose for people? Do you provide them with meaningful work? Do you help them develop their skills? And how do you distribute pay equitably? And then, of course, do you even have a strategy around all of this? And do you communicate? Do people actually know what they're paid and why they're paid, as Josh said before, too? And if they don't understand that, it won't seem fair and they won't be able to do their best work. So all of that, we'll talk about now three kind of practices, three strategies that we want to give you that you could think about as you approach all of this inflationary and still a very labor compressed environment. The traditional approaches to total rewards, they all don't matter so much. So traditionally you do benchmarking, pay levels, and of course you got to do that. You got to pay people a lot of money if you want to get the right people. You're going to think about like really an affordable healthcare offering, supporting childcare, all of those, or any of the perks. And there's many, many perks out here. I live in Palo Alto, and so all of the tech companies, they have the free food, of course, and they have the great campuses, and they have the nap rooms and the ping pong tables. But all of this is really going to help you with productivity, as Josh said, or is it just something that you feel you have to do and throw more at people? So here's the first strategy that we want to think about is, how do you create a healthy organization? And this is actually insights from a study that we did late last year as well, where we said all these benefits programs that you can throw at people, are they really getting to the issue of performance, productivity, collaboration, leadership, or are they more noise and more confusing to people? And we talked with some companies that have, I don't know, 95 or 120 different benefits and perk programs out there. And of course, their employees all don't know about those. And lots and lots of vendors are out there too. And we just put some of them in there. where you say there's all these vendors out there that are trying to sell you the best well-being platform, mental well-being, physical health, financial fitness support, social community, but is it all making any difference to people, and how much does it actually get to the bottom of being healthy at the core? And what we found out is those organizations, we call them healthy organizations, and it's just 15% of companies are healthy at the core. And they don't think about just safety or well-being as the lower levels do, or they just don't think about turning the employees into like employee health, but they think about healthy meeting practices and better work environment and more meaningful work and slack time so people can actually have some rest and de-stress. So thinking about this not as an individual practice of creating health, but as an organization, can you create the organization that's actually healthy? We talked with, for example, one of the big tech companies here in the Bay Area, I won't mention their name, in the pandemic, and they told us, we thought people were so stressed and they were working so much, we gave them all these like online yoga classes, and when we asked them, what do you think about the online yoga classes? And the employees told us, well, I'd rather not go to another online yoga class after I've worked 70 hours. I just don't want to work 70 hours to begin with. So that's a little bit more about how you think about these healthy practices, healthy work environment, and healthy organization at the core. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy is flexibility. You saw that column light up in the framework that we shared here. Is people are really looking for flexibility. LinkedIn published a study where they said 20% of the jobs that they have out there now is remote, but 50% of the applicants are going to these 20% of the jobs. And I think now it's even more so. I think this is from earlier in the year. Now I think it's 15% of the jobs are remote, and 55% of the applicants go to all these jobs. And the reason for that is people, of course, prefer to have the option to work anywhere where they are. They want to have the option to go maybe to a meeting, to get together with people. And it's also better for business. And this comes from our early results from our total rewards study. 23% of companies have some kind of clear strategy around remote and hybrid work, but those 23% of the companies have much better financial results, delight their customers much more so, and they also innovate better. So the myth that hybrid and remote work doesn't create innovation, doesn't help customers get what they need, is really not true. If you have a strategy around that, if you create a strategy around what kind of culture you create, how you actually establish rituals and rhythms, and how you think about bringing people together face-to-face when needed, but don't force them to come to an office. And this is actually a screenshot from a class that we have in the Josh Bersin Academy, and people love that class because it really helps you think about hybrid work, not as a policy, but as a design challenge. So how can you design hybrid work, remote work, not as a inflexible policy of where you tell people you're going to come to the office on Wednesday and Thursday maybe, or you have to come to an office 3 days a week or something like that, but help them establish these practices, these routines, these rituals, and maintain your culture. It's not about policies. It's more about employee-first design, so involving employees in the design. We studied, for example, a very large Dutch bank, Rabobank, and they are serving their employees every month on their preferences for remote and hybrid work. And they're also monitoring when do people come to the offices, and then they change the office spaces around, and they are also calculating their carbon footprint that gets reduced from having hybrid work and allowing people to work from home. And they're able to close some of the offices as well, which of course gets you more money that you could potentially give to the employees in some way or fashion, give them back some of the money if you want to increase pay, increase bonuses. If you reduce the footprint that you have in your office spaces, it's going to free up some of the resources as well. So it's kind of a win-win if you establish this in a better way. We have a lot of insights on that. I mentioned Rabobank. I also mentioned Dow, for example. They're an industrial company, and of course for some of their workers, they can't work remotely. But what they do is they have a program that's called Design Your Day. And they allow employees, even the employees maybe in the manufacturing sites, to design their schedule, or think about how can we give people flexibility, even if their work doesn't allow them to work remotely, because of course you can't do manufacturing from home, but they have other flexibility for people. So think about all of these other workers that might not be sitting at a computer all day long. How can they get flexibility? And how can they design their day for the future? So that's the second strategy. And the third strategy is actually really, really big, and Josh talked about it a little bit too, pay equity. Pay equity, of course, we know all of these pay equity laws and pay transparency laws. Here in California, they're going to take effect in January, and I know in New York they started in November. And then, of course, you see all these pay transparency kind of issues that jobs are posted, for example, on LinkedIn in New York. I saw one job that was literally posted, and the salary range was posted between $50,000 and $250,000. Well, that's not that's not really pay transparency, because the range is way too big. And so companies are really thinking about how can you use pay transparency to create more pay equity. And you see also some of these pay equity lawsuits that have been settled. The $118 million Google lawsuit was one of the biggest ones, I think, in the history as well. Also very famous, and I know the Soccer World Cup is going on right now, the U.S. women's soccer player lawsuit, where they sued basically for getting equal pay to the men. And if you follow soccer, the American men's team is very bad, and the American women's team is very, very good, but yet they were paid a lot less. And so they said, how come we get paid a lot less? We win every game, and the men kind of lose all the games. And they won. So transparency is a big step into that, but it goes much further than pay transparency. So let me talk a little bit about what pay equity is and why to do this. Pay equity is actually much more impactful to outcomes than paying people a lot of money. And the reason for that is when people understand why they're paid, what they're paid, and they feel it's fair and equitable, they can do better work. They're not going to leave you. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to help others as well. They're not going to be all that competitive to try to not support other teams. So pay equity is a lot more impactful and actually a lot cheaper than trying to pay people a lot of money. But it's not easy. It's not easy because if you think about pay equity, the notion is very simple. It's equal pay for equal work. But if you go behind the hood under that, it contains a lot of things. You're going to think about what's the performance like, what are the qualifications like, what skills do people have, and what's our job structures. And of course, equal pay for equal work doesn't mean women get paid the same as men. It means women in a specific job that have the same qualification, the same performance, get paid the same as men. So it doesn't mean like a CFO gets paid the same as the janitor, of course, just because that would be pay gap. But the equal pay equity is actually a very, very complex and very data rich and very challenging thing to understand and to determine. But it's really, really important to make it happen. Here's a little bit of detail on the difference between the pay gap and the pay equity audit. I'm not going to go through all of that, but basically the pay gap literally means compares, for example, women to men. It says, here's all our women in the company, here's all our men in the company, and we just compare what do women make. And so then you say, well, women earn, for example, US-wide, it's about 80 cents to $1 that men make. But is that good or bad? You don't know, right? Because you're not looking at comparable jobs. You're not looking at performance levels. You're not looking at locations, for example, or salary history, or what skills people have outside of their job, what other contributions they make to the company. And that's what the pay equity audit and pay equity work is really all about. And companies like Salesforce, of course, they were the first one that went out publicly to say, we have to do this and have to do this well. But other companies, lots of companies are now looking at that too, because it's going to be a requirement pretty soon, I think, legally required to actually look at pay equity in a really systematic and data-based way. So equity is actually not equality. And Josh and I had a good conversation around that actually yesterday, so that's why I brought this in here. Equity is really making sure that people get equal pay for equal work. Equality would mean everybody gets the same. And equality doesn't really inspire performance. It doesn't really, it's not even equitable, right? So thinking about what should differentiate pay, absolutely. Performance levels, what job people do, where they work. Of course, when you're in a high cost of living location, you've got to make more money than somebody who lives in a lower cost of living location. Other contributions beyond your job, of course, as well. Do people support their team members? What's the span of control? For example, we talked with a manufacturing company on pay equity, and they told us in some of their manufacturing sites, the spans of controls for a supervisor are 1 to 50, and then some of them are 1 to 500. Well, the person that has a bigger span of control, of course, they have a harder job to do, so they probably have to make more money. But what shouldn't differentiate pay is, of course, like what's your gender or what's your race, what's your ethnicity or how old you are, or even like the hidden things like what's your political views or how are you friends with people in higher level of the organization. So all of these, you gotta like balance the and look at what should differentiate pay and what shouldn't differentiate pay. And it's really an ongoing process that you got to think about all the time. So you're going to think about your pay strategy. You're going to think about who's going to support this, because once you identify issues with pay equity, you got to also mitigate them. So you got to address them. You're going to spend some money with them. When we talked with Salesforce, for example, they said, and that was a very public story, of course, out there. They said our CEO, Mark Benioff, was actually the one who was sponsoring that, and he put some millions of dollars behind that every year, but the gap gets smaller. So every year they do this pay equity audit, the gap gets smaller, and the money they have to spend on addressing these pay equity issues gets actually smaller, and that's what it's all about. There's lots of there's some not lots, but some companies out there that do this for a living. So there's some specialized software companies out there, and we also wrote a report on that, and we're going to write some more on that as we study that topic in the total reward study really, really significantly. So those were the three strategies: building a healthy organization, healthy at the core, not just throwing a lot of benefits at people, inspiring flexibility for people, and then focusing on pay equity. So Josh, you want to bring us home on the key takeaways?
Yes, thank you, Kathi. This is so much information. I'm sure people are dying. I know everybody wants the slides, and we'll figure out how to do that. So a couple of things I want to touch on, and then we'll open it up to any questions that people have. As you can see from this chart, we do these types of analysis in all of the different areas of HR. And what we basically do is we look at financial returns on excellence in this area, human capital returns like retention and engagement, and then innovation, whether the company is a pioneering growth company or a leader. And as you can see, using the maturity model that we've developed for pay and pay equity, you will get a high return on this. But let me sort of add a little sort of caveat on this. There's two philosophies of pay, and it gets to this question that comes up from this. This was a study that Microsoft did about a month ago that was very surprising and very important, where they've discovered through their work trend study that about 80 to 90% of employees believe they're highly productive, yet only 12% of leaders do. Now, let's suppose you're those leaders in the red, and you're in the 88% of leaders who don't believe your organization is productive for some reason, whatever that reason may be. You have two ways to think about this. One is you can sort of take the Elon Musk attitude and you can say, I want every engineer to show me your code and I'm going to evaluate if you're any good, which is essentially a philosophy that the organization's performance is the sum total of the individual performance of each person. Which, if you were a mathematician, you would sort of think that was true. And you would say, we're going to optimize every individual, and any individual who's underperforming, we're going to pay them less, or we're going to get them out of here, or we're maybe going to try to get them to take a new job or learn how to do their job better. And that will lead you to a highly differentiated pay strategy where you have wide variations in pay, very heavy pay for performance culture. Investment banks are like this. To some degree, the consulting firms are like this. And you'll have high turnover. You'll have a lot of politics. And you may or may not have a successful company over the long run. The second, by the way, we have data. I'm not going to show you the data because it's going to come out later on. That model is not necessarily the best. The second model is you say, well, maybe this productivity problem is an organizational issue. Maybe it isn't the fault or responsibility of each individual. Maybe we need to look at it as how people work together, how the organization is designed, how the jobs are designed, what the managers are doing and how the managers are leading their teams, how much time people are spending on collaboration versus internal individual efforts. And that will lead you to a more advanced pay structure, which is more of an equitable strategy that Kathi talked about earlier. I'm not going to give you the answer, by the way. We haven't launched the research yet because I want you guys to come back and hear more. But that is what this data is showing you, is that you have a philosophical choice that you can make. Usually you're going to have to talk to your CFO and your CEO about this, about how do we want to run this place. I had an interesting experience over the summer. I won't mention the name of the company, but there's a very, very large tech company, one of the largest in the planet, was redoing their performance management process. And the old one was very, very time-consuming, very bureaucratic, very political, not very successful at weeding out low performers. And it was designed when the company was much, much smaller, and everybody kind of hated it. So they said, they called us up and they said, would you tell us what a best practice performance management process looks like? As if there's one that everybody can do. And I said, okay, well, we'll be happy to help you with that. But the first question I have to ask you is, what is your philosophy of performance? What do you believe performance means, looks like? How do you characterize it? How do you find it? What creates it? They didn't have an answer. They were flabbergasted that I asked them that question. You have to ask yourself that question because all of the various pay strategies you have are going to be rooted in some philosophy of performance. And in this economy where we're going to have less flexibility and a little bit less forgiveness, if we do have some sort of recession, you're going to have to be asked to justify the pay policies you have. I believe this is a design problem, and what we've been talking about with our clients and what our conference and what my book is all about is that we're not in the benefits business anymore, we're in the design business. Yes, we have to pay people well. Yes, we have to be competitive. Yes, we have to keep up with the pay strategies of every city. Otherwise, nobody will come work for us. But beyond that, we have to design the employee experience that's relevant to us. Great companies don't always have the highest pay. In fact, many of the world's most successful companies are moderately, competitive, but they're not top performers on the pay levels because the employees come to work them for other reasons, as Kathi talked to you about. And that's a design problem that you can have yourself. I remember years ago, I talked to the head of comp and benefits at Cisco, which is a very, very well-run company. And she said, one of the things we learned is there's no way we're going to compete with all these various networking and software and tech companies in Silicon Valley. We can't keep up with them. So we're going to build a value proposition for employees that's bigger than that. We're going to show them a very, very complex, rich developmental career. We're going to give them lots of opportunity to work around the world. We're going to let them work on projects that massive impact on the social experiences people have in their societies. And yeah, they're going to make a good living here too, and we're going to take care of their pay and we're going to take care of their benefits. But we're not going to pay them the same amount as a startup. And we're going to be really clear about that. And we're going to tell people that. And if they want to make startup level salaries, they can go work somewhere else. And it's worked well for them over the years. And so, pay is a design issue. It isn't just a compliance issue of buying the Radford metrics and saying, where are we on the bands, and then we're done. And that's the reason it's such an interesting topic. the final thing, I'll just do one quick plug on my book. So what I did, as many of you may know, over the last 15 or 20 years, is I've been studying this with people like Kathi and others, and doing these studies, and then looked at the Glassdoor ratings and the financial performance of thousands of companies, and essentially statistically proved to myself, and you can read the book and understand it, that companies that endure over many years, by the way, for one period of time, you can do almost anything you want. People will adapt. But over a long period of time, they have a much different way of looking at their workforce. And so what the book is about is these 7 ideas, these 7 big topics, many of which cover pay, that define what I call enduring organizations or irresistible organizations. So if you want to dig into this and really listen to stories and hear about all sorts of examples of how this works, I encourage you to buy the book, and we'll be doing more on this topic. By the way, mark your calendar, June 20th to 22nd next year. It seems like a long time off, but it'll be here before you know it. We're going to have the Irresistible Conference. And so we're going to have 450 senior HR people join us and talk about all these topics and a lot more. So if you're a fan of what we do, join our research membership program, join the Academy, or come to the conference. Any of or all of those are great as far as I'm concerned. And we really appreciate you taking some time with us. So Kathi, thank you so much for all of your wisdom here. I think we'll open up to questions. We have about 7 minutes left.
Yeah, and I see some great questions in there. Maybe should we just start with one of them?
Sure.
The last one that I saw come in, it was on design thinking, and I love that question. The question was, I don't know if we can open up for people to speak, or if you want to just read it out. I don't actually know.
Do you have it, Kathi?
Yeah, I have it here from.
Do you recommend design thinking?
Yeah, I recommend using the design thinking methodology as a way to engage employees and teams, making them feel as though they are contributing to meaningful work in the company, resulting in better quality processes, products, processes, productivity, and employee retention. And I love that question because I'll just start, Josh, and then I'd love to get your thoughts. But I absolutely think design thinking is one of the best ways to do that. Not just making them feel as though they are contributing, but they are actually contributing. So you don't just make them feel so, but you create much better products, because they're the products or their processes or the solutions that people actually need and want, not something that you might want to do. And I have a great story from Deutsche Telekom that actually used design thinking for even designing the executive benefits for their executives in Germany. So they use design thinking to ask them about, do you want a company car, or do you want to have more money, or do you want to have some other benefits? So they use it for non-technology things too. So don't just think about design thinking as something you can use for tech solutions. You can use it for any of these kind of, any really solutions, and involving the people that actually are going to use the solutions is going to make better solutions. And it's also a key way of getting adoption of the solutions, because if it's theirs, they're going to use it, right? If you design it and it's nothing that they need, they're probably not going to, you're going to have a hard time pushing the boulder up the hill, right? To tell people, please use that solution. But if it was designed with them, it's going to be much easier to get it adopted as well. So I think.
Well, and one more thing on that topic. I mean, I agree completely. And design thinking is a domain of expertise that you should take a course in it or read a book on it. Yeah. One of the other aspects of design thinking is iterative design. Don't spend a year designing something in the closet or in the conference room with a bunch of HR people and then roll it out and expect everybody to like it. As you know, that's a very big risk when you do it that way. You co-design it with them, you do it in pieces, you iterate on it, you experiment, and you learn, and it gets better and better and better. And I know pay has never been something people wanted to be creative about, but you have to, otherwise, again, it's just one of these really important issues that you're never going to get right the first time, and you've got to constantly be looking at it.
Yeah, and you could even use it. I've heard, actually, there was another question in there about giving people choices and flexibility of their pay and rewards. And I've heard of, it was a financial services company. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but a financial services company, they actually through design thinking, they identified that people wanted to have more choices do they want most of their pay to be performance-based, or do they like individual performance-based? Do they want it more like guaranteed and less at-risk compensation? And they identify that through design thinking, and now they let people choose. You got to choose up front, of course. You can't choose at the year end and you say, well, now I didn't have such a good year. I don't want to have my performance-based pay at stake, and I'm going to choose the less risky option. So they let people actually choose at the beginning of the year to say, I want most of my pay levels guaranteed and just a little bit at risk, or I want a much bigger percentage at risk. And it's like, in the end of the day, it's people's choice, right? And once people have that choice, then they're gonna like feel much more empowered to say, I made the right choice for my own situation and for my family. So there's some
another example of sort of let me give you another example of, I think, creative pay. Dean Carter, who recently left Patagonia as the CHRO, implemented a pay process there. And this is a very mission-driven company. That's a business that is in the business of saving the planet, not selling clothes. What they decided is they really wanted people to focus on their own skills development and their collaboration with others. And so the pay system has two components. Your base pay goes up every year based on your skills in the job that you're in as the person doing that job. So it encourages everybody to be good at whatever the job is they're doing. Your bonus is based on the projects or the goals that you have set for yourself to achieve. So you can get a big bonus and no base pay increase, or you can get a big base pay increase and no bonus. And it's worked really well for them because they have a lot of big cross-functional projects they do in different environmental areas. But some people don't want to do those projects. They just want to do their job well. So individuals can decide how they want to balance their pay. So there's many, many iterations on that you can come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Like one more question that I thought was interesting, because we actually didn't mention it, but it came out really big, is how important is the communication strategy to the success of these changes? We didn't talk about that a lot, but communication was a huge point, actually, because Josh mentioned it in the beginning too. If people don't understand that you're, for example, working on pay equity, you're trying to make it fair, you're trying to make it equitable, or they don't even understand how their pay or their rewards are determined, they're not going to feel very good about it, right? They're going to say, I don't understand what somebody else is making, I don't understand why I'm getting this bonus or why I'm getting this recognition or something like that. So communication and transparency is really, really key there. Of course, you got to have a strategy around it too. So if you remember that heat map, strategy lit up really high, but then also communication lights up really, really well too. So communication really key on that. Yeah. We have a great story actually on American Airlines on pay equity that we wrote up. They did a big push on pay equity, but then in the end we asked them, do people actually know you're doing this? And they said, not so much. So if people don't know it, you won't get credit for it. So tell people you're doing that, and it's not going to be perfect, but unless they know you're actually focusing on that, people will say, well, I don't think it's fair. So at least if they know you're working on it, it's okay if it's not perfect, because you'll never be perfect on that, right? So, yeah. I know we're probably out of time. Josh, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, I mean, Kathi, thank you once again for all of this incredible work that you do. So I hope this has stimulated a lot of thinking and ideas. We'll figure out how to get you guys the slides. The big study will be out in January, February, I think.
Yep.
So again, join our membership program, join the Academy. You can get access to all this, and we'll continue doing these events. We do them roughly once a month with HRE, so come back for more, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.